Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. We are in week 13 of our Epic Jedi conversations about the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. We have 3, maybe 4 more sessions to go if we wrap up right before Christmas, the Christmas holiday. Tonight we're going to be covering 2 chapters, and I'll talk about that in a second. I wanted to come back to what we've been celebrating every Monday, calling attention to Native American Heritage Month. And I want to show a video and share a recommendation before we jump into the conversations. But just so that everyone gets to see and hear, I'm going to bring our 2 guests on, and then we can chat a little bit about what we're watching. So first of all, I'm going to bring on Richard McCrow. Hello, Richard. Thank you for joining me every week. And then this week, our second guest will be Dr. Tommy Tunson. Hello, sir. Happy Monday. We've been calling attention to celebratory months, multicultural celebratory months, every time we do this. So this is going to be, tomorrow will be the end of Native American Heritage Month, Indigenous Peoples Heritage Month. And I've kind of been making recommendations, but sort of just pushing people towards social media and documentaries and books, that kind of thing. And today I wanted to call attention to a Instagram page that I follow that I think is pretty cool. There are so many, so definitely search for those. But I wanted to share this one because there's always a lot of cool artistic stuff that comes across. Oops. Okay, this is called Illuminative, and they've got tons of things. Activism. It's a nonprofit, so I wanted to call attention to it a little bit because of Giving Tuesday, so you can give to their fund and see where that money goes. They're trying to raise $100,000 for this particular program for artists. But there's this show that I've recommended several times, actually this whole year. It's called Reservation Dogs, and there's a video here that they reposted that I wanted to share.
Where does the story come from? Hi, my name is Sterling Harjo, co-creator of Resurging Dogs. A lot of things that you see in the show inspired from our native indigenous community. We watch out for each other, give each other jobs, pull each other up. This industry was built on people giving each other opportunity. It is a community, and that's what you do in a community. I asked for native writers and all indigenous directors, because if you want to tell a story about a place, why not get the people? Live that life. Tell it. You and your friends. What are you going to fight for?
What we're doing now is we're giving youth their reference for what it is to be a native teenager. It doesn't have to be as close enough. They finally get to see it. This has been most awesome and production.
We live in the beauty of our communities. Where does the story come from? Hi, my name is Sterling Harjo, co-creator of Reservation Dogs. A lot of the things that you see in the show.
Okay. That's a very cool show. It's funny. There's a lot of drama, and there's a lot of family, and there's a lot of back and forth between. If you saw the sort of stereotypical, Indian on a horse kind of thing that you would see probably on a lot of representations in older movies. We're obviously aware that that's not it's not appropriate necessarily. It's appropriated, and but that character is really funny, and you follow the teenagers, and there's showing what life would be like, and it's in Oklahoma, I think, in the middle of Oklahoma, on a reservation. So that's an Instagram feed that I follow, and a show that I think is very cool, and really funny, and you should get into it and support that. There's a couple of other new ones that they're just more and more representation available. If you look through your streaming services, you'll see the effort that's really being made to be more representative of the different tribes across the United States. So check those out. I'm going to share that. And then the other thing I wanted to share doesn't have anything to do with Native American Month, but it is a newsletter that I subscribe to, and it's on LinkedIn. Let me get that up. And this was the latest article. Does resharing past experiences with racism lead to systemic changes? This is today. So obviously these conversations keep happening. They have to keep happening. But she goes into, you can go in and subscribe to it. It'll come to your email inbox. But this doctor goes into every week. The topics are amazing, enlightening, highlighting different experiences for her. She's was it senior editor, I think, at Forbes, has a TED Talk. But this one, I think, really calls out, as we keep talking about the kinds of changes we want to see in our organizations. And we've talked about this before, but to stop calling on the people of color who have traumatic experiences or experiences with racism to keep reliving the experiences over and over again, to educate non-people of color about the trauma that, it's starting to sort of create a situation where people are having to relive and even are re-triggered and re-traumatized because they have to keep sharing these stories with every single person who didn't hear it or wants another example or wants to hear the example again. So it's a great article. It's a great newsletter. So I wanted to share that. So check those out. Okay, so welcome to Caste. We're going to be looking at chapters 25 and 26 today. And the topic for these two chapters was all about backlash. And, the steps, any steps that we think we're making forward, and then all the different ways that these changes or innovations or developments are pushed back. And then chapter 27 next week, we'll talk about symbols of caste, but this is sort of like the resurgence, because chapter 25 is going to dive a little deeper into some conversation that we've had about our 44th president. And then chapter 26 is going to talk a little bit about our 45th president. So that's where chapter 25 is the change in the script, because we all thought we were so enlightened and patted ourselves on the back for 8 years. And then chapter 26 talks about the resurgence of what we'd been fighting against all this time. So here's chapter 25, a change in the script. And like I said, this is going to start talking a little bit about President Obama, what led up to the election, what happened after the election, his whole term, the double term, and then leading into 2016. So this is chapter 25. Do either of you have anything you want to share before we start pulling out specific quotes from this chapter? Nope. That sound, there's a weird sound on my computer. Sorry, guys. Okay, so the whole idea behind this chapter is the disruption of the social order and Barack Obama, the human equivalent of a supernova. These are not my words. I'm not describing him this way. Wilkerson is illustrating the change in the script with this disruption, with this human equivalent of a supernova. We've talked about people of color having to be exceptional to move ahead. And this was like the ultimate example, right? Someone who makes it all the way to the highest, most powerful position in our country. But I kind of want to know what your reaction was to kind of hearing having someone described in this way. The disruption, but then also having to be a supernova to make their way. Tommy?
You want me to go first?
Sure. I can't see Richard.
I really like the statement that was taken out of that chapter, disruption of social order. That has epic meaning, sorry to use the word epic, meaning in American history, because no one would have ever dreamed that a descendant of slaves would ever be the president of the most powerful country in the history of mankind. And everybody had their own agenda and timeline, but nobody ever saw this coming. They didn't. Not only was it because he was black, but look at his name, Barack Obama.
Right.
Okay, so that's strike two. The equivalent of a supernova, basically, in my interpretation, if you know what a supernova, nova is when a sun explodes and spreads particles all through space. Well, the explosion happened when he was elected president. Nobody saw this coming. And the explosion lasted for 8 years. And I just think it was long time coming. Should have happened years ago. But again, the social order was not to have a black person or a female as president in this country. Regardless of how we all give our hearts out and we all sing Kumbaya, this was never part of the social order of this country. And it did, like a supernova changes the solar system, it changed American history.
Yes. Richard?
Yeah, I felt. I mean, when I just go back to that time frame, and I'm thinking, and I apologize to everybody that my camera is off. My internet connection out here is sort of shaky, so. But I do think that, you know, as I think of the time frame and the way that I chose to vote during that time. You know, I sort of wavered back and forth between political parties, depending on what I think the need is at the time and the way I vote and the way I looked at things. But I did think that Barack Obama came with some serious credentials, although McCain had the political credentials of the time, the most experienced politician. And so I looked at that and I thought, you know, here's this Harvard lawyer, his wife's a Harvard grad. They're coming with new experiences and new challenges. The country was in the mood for that at the time. But I don't think people really saw it coming as a black man running for president. And so I get a little like, okay, I voted for Obama because he just felt like a leader, you know, and the way he talked when he talked about hope and the way he talked about si se puede and yes we can so at the time, was I surprised? I think I was. But I was also extremely happy. The realization that a black person was elected to office for me didn't come before during the campaigning. It came the day after. Just that realization that a black man got elected, and it was exciting. But then you've got to wonder, because a lot of white Americans thought, why didn't McCain get that? McCain should have got that. McCain. And that's when the questions started rolling about what's going to happen in the Oval Office at this time. And I remember people talking about that. Yeah. I know I was rambling a little bit.
I think, yeah, I think that part of that, and I will speak also for myself, and voting for Barack Obama, and I think that these next couple of quotes from the book sort of speak to this idea, because I feel like you were saying, Richard, about being able to see, because you wanted someone like him in office based on credentials, probably. And this idea that the story did not trigger immediate discomfort in the dominant caste has a lot to do with knowing the story, or paying attention to parts of the story that you were comfortable with. So there's some conversation in the chapter about knowing that his mom is white from Kansas, right? And the difference that made to some people, because it wasn't that they were, or maybe they could see themselves in Kansas, right? Maybe they could see that there's a part of this person that they could relate to. And so this, I like the way she kind of described it, this idea that it didn't immediately trigger some people into thinking that they couldn't possibly vote for this Black man, because there's a little part of him that was like us. What do you think?
I think that's going up the river a little piece. And I will tell you that Rich is right about yes, we can. I have friends that were in his cabinet, and so we got to talk about this. And believe it or not, it did trigger discomfort. There was a whole group of the Black Caucus that said, "We're in trouble now. There's going to be such a backlash from electing him president." And I can tell you, there wasn't one Black person I talked to. And then I was on active military duty at the time, so I got to travel the country. And anybody else who thought for a fact, they said, well, it's about time. And everybody was hoping he would get elected to be the first. And I don't know if either one of you are familiar with this other term, but Bill Clinton was also called the first Black president until Barack Obama was elected. I don't know if you remember that, Rich.
I do remember that.
Yeah, I also remember that.
Oh.
94 wasn't that long.
That went away when Obama was elected president.
Yes, but this idea is more about I think the beginning of what we were seeing, and how quickly people kind of got behind it, the campaign, in the dominant caste, because we're talking about the way that the dominant caste, the top of the hierarchy, was saying that it was okay. And I think once it got going, they couldn't figure out how to stop it. And maybe that was part of it.
Okay,
that they were forced.
Now I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, because it did create discomfort. I heard all my colleagues in law enforcement at the time saying, oh no, what's going to happen if this, but you're right, Letty. I think you're 100%. That ball got rolling down the hill and couldn't be stopped.
Yeah. So then,
how much did yeah, this surprised me. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Letty.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking, when Barack Obama was first elected, the realization that a Black person was now the president, I think was, for me, was a positive experience. But then it did hit, like this really happened. And I can remember, sort of the Obama chants and the excitement surrounding that. I think where I had the most opposite weird reaction, well, it wasn't weird, but when Trump got elected and then was in the presidency, I can remember that the first 6 months you did not hear from President Obama after Trump was elected. You didn't hear from him. And I remember the first time he spoke, I can't remember where it was, but I just remember him taking the mic and then laughing and saying, "Do you miss me?" and how funny that was, because I thought, God, I do miss you. I miss you so much. And that feeling, and yeah, well, it's way off topic, and I apologize for that, but it does make me know that the feelings and emotions that go with this are strong and alive.
This was sort of what you were talking about. I think what I was going off of what you said, the very first comment you were making, Richard, about being able to claim Obama for yourselves. I just thought it was an interesting comment that she made about that because of the story, and once the campaign was able to highlight those things that they felt were relevant to people or that people would connect with, then that's for those of us that were paying attention in the positive, only the positive ways. That was all we saw. That was all we cared about, and it affected us in a positive way. So we wanted to vote Democratic that year. But on the other side of that, obviously, that also means that, like you're saying, Richard, in the aftermath, maybe in the next 24 hours or 48 hours, it's like this idea that, wait a minute, are you telling me that we are not the center of the universe? How did this happen? Who let this happen? This cannot happen again. So I think that's those of us who weren't paying attention, and I will say me, I wasn't paying that close attention. 2008, I had a baby. That's my excuse. But this idea that people who were suddenly deciding they're going to be obstructionists after the president was elected, they were seeing now, they're considering that they're losing their centrality, right? They're not the center, and what can they do about it? And of course, we know what those 8 years were like politically. We don't know personally, but we were watching it happen.
Which to me, oh,
please.
Oh, I was going to say, to me, that time frame sort of demonstrated the greatness of that presidency because of the obstruction that was going on during that whole 8 years in trying to block all these things. And that's what gave us Obamacare and the changes in some of the tax laws at the time. Now, a lot of that's been repealed and set back during the Trump years, but it was a time where you had some hope that you didn't mind paying your taxes because it was going to help people. But at the same time, for the middle class, you saw the tax burden started to reduce a little bit. And so, yeah, I'm amazed how much was accomplished during that time. And how much more could have been accomplished had the president of the United States not been obstructed in his goals and what he was trying to accomplish.
It's just one more way that that we can talk about that loss, the potential, right? The loss of potential. It's just another way. I mean, we talked in another chapter about how the dominant class will shoot themselves in the foot. Will the example of the person who committed suicide after he became president, like they will turn on themselves and totally crap all over everything that they know and love because that one thing is off balance. It's that disruption of the social order. Were you gonna say something, Tommy?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. We're gonna shift a little bit. It's the same chapter, but we're gonna focus on dominant caste women. And I don't know if it's appropriate or not how deep we go into this conversation because there aren't any dominant caste women here to defend themselves, but I mean, it's just a photo op on a tarmac at an airport one of those photos seen around the world kinds of things, right? Where Arizona Governor Jan Brewer sticks her finger in the president's face. I mean, there's always a spotlight in those moments. What I want to maybe have you talk a little bit about, each of you, is her response to that photo being highlighted and her comments. People were saying, you know, you're putting your finger in the face of the leader of the free world. Like, where's the respect? Like, you didn't know your place when it came to hierarchy in the government. You didn't know your place. And it was a moment captured where it was like the other way around, right? Where the president didn't know his place because she was a white woman sticking her finger in a black man's face. It wasn't a governor sticking her finger in the president of the United States' face, but how she used it after. Disgusting. I don't know if you want to talk about it or not. Do you want to comment on it?
I'm getting sort of a delay. But I don't remember, to be honest, I don't remember the episode and the event that happened that day. And so what I'm getting is just from the book, and maybe I should remember it, but for some reason I don't recall it. But I do remember who the governor was at that time, and so it seemed, as I'm reading it, that it was intentional disrespect on the tarmac, and the question after, and what she sort of portraying, was trying to shine the best light on it while maintaining her electoral base. And but it does not sit well that she didn't understand the situation and how many cameras were pointed that direction and what was going on. And again, I apologize. I'm cutting in and out over here.
I remember it when it happened. I saw it on TV. And that privilege popped into my mind. The white privilege thing popped into my mind. And I can tell you from colleagues, it popped into all of their minds as well, that nobody could even fathom disrespecting the president of the United States on national TV. And it was like back in, and this is what was said in my community. What was said was, yeah, it was as though he was still a Negro, regardless of the fact that he was a president, because a white woman was sticking her finger in his face, which was the accepted practice in this country for more than 100 years. So it was just despicable to see, unheard of to see, and unconscionable to see. But that's where that privilege comes in, that somebody believes they can do that. And it wasn't, if it was a matter of separation of governor versus president, nobody with half an intelligent brain would understand that that was okay to do to the president of the United States. But if you take that away and you leave what people see in TV, that's what occurred.
Right. I think part of it is, I mean, it's highlighted the way that it was highlighted because, and now I'm assuming actually that she was a Republican governor.
Yeah.
Yes, but the idea that it didn't matter what the conversation was, because she could have just been like joking about something. We knew what happened after the story was actually told. The complete story was told about why she was, giving him grief and what was in the envelope she handed him and all that. And even in some of the other photos, seconds before and seconds after, they're smiling, right? Because obviously, what's he going to do? Like, have the Secret Service tackle her. Of course he's smiling.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
so it wasn't like, right, it didn't have to, it's not necessarily cordial, but it doesn't matter what they were talking about, because the optics of it are that, right? It's dominant caste woman putting her finger in a black man's face, who just happens to be the president of the United States. So it is all about privilege. To be, you know, to not have to think about how you're behaving and your body language towards the president of the United States, because other people would have been tackled to the ground, or at least someone would have stepped in, or somebody would have pulled her aside later and said, you don't put your damn finger in the president's face, okay? Like, you don't do that. I don't know if that happened, but there was also, I think, Richard, you mentioned this a little bit, how she used it after, right, to kind of energize her base, like, yeah, I did that. I mean, I'm obviously putting my own spin on it, but the idea that she would say, yes, I intended to put my finger in his face, and I intended to put him in his place, and you know, give me money so I can run for governor again. But then also, the worst part was that she said that then she felt threatened, that she felt like she had to stand up for herself, like she felt like she had to puff up because there was some kind of threat, some kind of intimidation happening. And that just, I mean, that's why I wanted to pull this out, because we're talking about the white women tears. We're talking about the dominant caste women pointing a finger, calling people out, blaming, not holding themselves accountable for their behavior, and making trouble for Black men. You don't have to comment on that, because maybe it's hard to do that when you're, but I'm saying it. And that's why I pulled this up, because it was just another version of it. It was just another version. And then she decided that that was the path she wanted to take. So now on the record, it's going to say that she felt threatened by President of the United States, and she had to put her finger in his face. Okay. Towards the end of the chapter, Wilkerson gives the example a little bit, and I don't know how much we want to dive into this part. The imagery seems pretty clear, because we know of the intentional obstruction that happened over the 8 years from day one in the government during that time. The comparison of handcuffing an African American president to the increase in this kind of violent activity towards Black people in America, specifically Black men in America. It's a pretty uncomfortable image to think about this way, but the example of using Trayvon Martin as an example in the book, when President Obama says that if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin. So this doesn't seem that far off in terms of imagery. What did you think about this? Accurate?
Yeah, accurate. And I think it's I think it also set the tone for the way things are for the next 25 years within our country, in that we will obstruct, we would cut off our own hands to prevent things from moving forward with an African American president. And it set that, and that battle continues to this day, where you still see Congress and the Senate and Mitch McConnell saying, no, we will not support anything that this president puts forward in talking about Biden. But this is a continuation. You know, when Obama was in office, this is when our country turned and shit hit the fan, and everybody was going after to say, we're not going to allow anything to happen And so in spite of all that, this president was able to get all the things I mentioned earlier through. And then then they were even more pissed. And then it's like, well, we got to get him out of here. And we talked about, I had mentioned that McCain, came in with all his credentials as the Republican nominee during 2008 and then, and didn't get it. But still, Obama had significant credentials that he came in that were outside of that as an outsider. And the irony in which Trump came into this as the outsider, and the person he was running against had all the credentials in the world, was probably more experienced than any other politician to be running for the president of the United States, and lost to this inexperienced, uneducated man, and who just claims to be a billionaire. And so the craziness of it all. And so, but it's put us on this weird track that I don't think we're able to get out of normally, that something has to happen and something has to give. And there's, and that's a dangerous thing, but it's coming, we're going down that road.
Mm-hmm.
I have felt handcuffed as a chief of police of an entire city. When I would want to do something, they would say, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I was handcuffed. And the symbolism of handcuffing goes back to the slave days, when they used to handcuff the slaves and take them to the market and put them in those chains. That's the symbolism of that. Reading that in the chapter just brought chills, because we're using a different metaphor and a different time to illustrate something that's been going on for over 100+ years.
That's a good point. Yeah. Because it ends up being this, right? Because there was that sort of disorder happening in our society, the caste system had to figure out a way to remind everyone what their place was. And even though Obama had 8 years, he had 2 terms, and his family, his cabinet, everyone that worked for him, and throughout the U.S., people that were trying to make these things happen and work, they were still reminded all the time of their place. Like, you're not supposed to be working towards these things that president is trying to put in place. And we're going to keep reminding you of it. And every single time somebody says, but is this really about race? And everybody says yes. And they want to fight about it, about economics or workforce or whatever. I think that's, everyone started asking. Sure.
The caste system reminded everyone of their place. That is a plethora of American history in that statement, because I gave an example, I think a few months ago, and I asked you guys, and I remember the look in your face, and I think I'm trying to think who else was on the show, but I said, okay, remind me of their place. What do you call a Black person with a PhD? Remember, Rich, I asked you that question, and Letty, I asked you. Do you remember the response? Dr. whoever or whatever PhD killed. That is not what is looked at in society. In society, they're reminded that there's still a Negro or Black person or African American, regardless of how much they've achieved in society. And we got a little bit more graphic in my community about what you still call that person with all that education. That finger in the face, remind it. That finger in the face was the same issue, different form. It's institutionalized on that type of behavior, to not see people for Rich is a perfect example. He sees people based on who and what they are and what they do, their training, education, and experience. He truly sees that. But there's a lot of people who say they believe in that, but never illustrate it. And I think that is part of the reminder of where everybody is in their place in the caste system.
Because it was also a reminder to the dominant caste. Like, don't forget, you guys, you're supposed to be the center. So now that things have been upended, you need to do everything you can to make sure that you get back into power. Whatever power you've lost, you need to regain it. So it's reminding everyone from the top down to the bottom, everyone's being reminded, you need to get back down to where you're supposed to be, and you need to climb back up there, because metaphorically, let's pretend that somebody got knocked off their pedestal and now they're trying to overcome. And so that feeling of loss, we talk about that a lot, right? In the last few years, we've talked about that feeling of loss that people have in the dominant caste, that they have, that there's some sense of loss because other people are doing well. They're not necessarily thriving, right? They're just barely making it, but it's just enough to make other people feel like now they have less. And so this is a perfect segue into the next chapter, because we, talk about Obama's 2 terms, and then there's this other turning point, sort of another reminder, right? There was a reminder when in 2008, and then there was another reminder in 2016. So 8 years later, this turning point and the resurgence of caste. I don't, and I'm sure she didn't mean it this way. This isn't to say that there was any kind of dip, right? That things were actually better, that things weren't about race. That's not what this is at all. The 2016 election just really made people realize that racism and caste as we now know it and have been talking about it was the point. And that all the other isms, right, that the sexism was also an issue for a lot of people, and that goes hand in hand with caste. And in 2016, I had no idea, had never had a conversation about caste. Obviously, this book came out last year, but that wasn't even something. It was all about, race and class in the conversations that I was having. So this way of looking at things, this book, I mean, it just turns, man, it really shines a spotlight on so much of what is happening in our country. So in 2016, she pulls up the example of talking to someone, I think she said a French scholar or an academic person, who said, after she was saying this could happen, after Gwen Ifill said to her at a party they were at, this could happen, that America would never do that. And I think a lot of us thought that. A lot of us really did think that.
Yeah.
But we didn't understand. We were blind, ignorant, I don't know, too hopeful. I feel dumb sometimes about it. I feel way more educated now than I did, 5 years ago. What was this? What was this feeling, this 2016? I just talked about not rehashing things and re-traumatizing people, but if you want to share a little bit about 2016.
Let me help out a little bit. Quote unquote, the South will rise again.
Right. Yeah.
Now think about that. Think about that. And it did. Mm-hmm. And over 70 million people who had lost power of the dominant caste regained that quote unquote power back through rising again, to remind everybody who is the 800-pound gorilla.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The truth is that no aspect of American life can be fully understood without considering caste and embedded hierarchy. And again, it's like once you know it and once you see it, you can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. What you're doing is making a decision to, keep empowering it, to keep elevating it, to keep the hierarchy in place. And these are difficult things in different organizations. It depends on where you are in the hierarchy. And no one wants to talk about caste, because I think even now, as we're reading this and having these conversations with my friends, that is still a difficult topic. And if you say that 2016 was about caste, it's not. It's about racism, or it's about economics. But this is the other part of it. This is what you were saying, Tommy, about 70 million people feeling like they needed someone to help them get back on top. So the racial economics, and thinking that a group is getting ahead based on, thinking that some people shouldn't get ahead based on their race and the color of their skin. How does this tie into what you saw maybe in 2016 and what you experienced this last election maybe? Is it better?
I'm with you when we talk about 2016, the disbelief, in the book as we're reading through it, and they're talking about people are not paying attention. People are not paying attention. Do you really think this is going to happen? I am one of those exactly. I thought there's no way this is going to happen. I thought it was a PR stunt. I thought, with him, Trump coming down the escalator, that's all. I just thought this is a PR stunt. This isn't real, and as he kept progressing forward, saying some of the most horrendous things during a campaign, and he kept moving forward, and you just had to wonder, even when we got to the final week before the election and we're listening to debate, or I can't remember if there's debate in that time frame, but we're just that feeling of he's not going to win, and it's going to be Hillary Clinton, and we're going to have the first woman president. And there was a sense of excitement and the sense of mourning after the election day that a lot of my friends and a lot of the people I know were experiencing. And I know it wasn't just me. I was watching it on national television, the just shock of what had just happened. And then to try and live for the next 4 years with that constant level of depression in your heart about things that were happening. I mean, as a white man, I was surprised. But my friends of color were like, you're surprised?
Yeah, like, there was no surprise.
When did you get surprised? Kind of thing. And I just
which part?
Yeah, which part? And then I'm like feeling sort of foolish that I believed somewhere in my heart that this the caste system that we're talking about, I was thinking at the time, racism and white supremacy thought processes was all something that was behind us. I don't know that I would said that out loud. I know I felt it in my heart, like, oh, we're doing so well. And then suddenly that was all washed away. And I was foolish enough to believe things have gotten better.
We, when I say we, I'm talking about Black executives. I was with a group of several Black executives that were very high politically, professionally, and socially. We sat in a couple meetings in Los Angeles. We knew this was going to happen. None of us was shocked because of the wave of American history of how politics goes. And nobody, after what happened with President Obama, we knew that is the true backlash is Trump getting elected in 2016. That's when the backlash came, November of 2016. That's when that tidal wave hit. But you know, again, I so admire Rich's viewpoint because Rich is probably only about 5% of people who didn't see it coming, but the rest of us, we saw it coming. And we'd hoped that we were wrong. And then because we also said if President Obama would have said 1/16 of what President Trump said during the campaign and during office, they would have tried to impeach him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They would have. They absolutely would have.
Yeah. And I'll admit, I used to vote sort of on this roller coaster, and I think I mentioned it before, to where I always had this belief that things balanced out. So I used to think that, you know, if you had a Democratic president, having a Republican Congress was a good thing. Checks and balances, man, it's all equal. This is going to work, and this is how we're going to stay safe and sane, is, you know. And so if a Republican president's in, I thought that a Democratic Congress would be a good thing, and to always balance it. Now I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? And I'm looking at it today, and we're just barely by the skin of our teeth do we have some control in Congress that we have to build on, because if we don't, we are going to freeze and get stuck, and then we start to fall apart. And all based on Caste. I mean, the thoughts out of this book are just amazing to me. But I always feel like I'm Johnny Come Lately in this thought process, because I feel.
And I'm glad that you are, because, you know, I don't know how we would make it if we didn't have that viewpoint that you have, because I've seen quite the other viewpoint for almost my entire life.
Yeah, it's.
I think there's also a lot to be said for, well, the idea of Johnny Come Lately makes a lot of sense with what I'm about to say next, because we keep hoping that that's the way things work. When we think about people who run for public office, or at least for me, it seems like the impression that I get is that people want to help, that they want to serve, that they want to put their time and energy towards making things better for, you know, their region, their constituents, and that's why people go into office. I don't know if that's shifting. I would have to like really read if there's been a study on what that shift is when it comes to political office. Plus, I've always lived, or I grew up in a small town, and I live in a small town, so that always seems to be like, people have aspirations and they want, you know, to be in the public eye. So there's some sense of, you know, I don't want to say narcissism, but it's, you know, I'm going to do this. I'm going to fight, and I'm going to do this. And I'm the change I want to see in the world, that kind of thing. Right. And so there's some, I feel like maybe we all still kind of have some belief in this altruistic human experience, that is something we want to believe in. But this kind of leads into this next comment from the book, that we always are confused, or some of us, that we keep saying that people are voting against their own interests. But in the world of Caste, that's not the case, right? She says people do in fact vote their interests when they're voting to cut things like social programs, anything that looks like it might have a democratic smell to it. They're going to vote against it, and it has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with whether or not it helps them in the long run. It has everything to do with who's putting it forward, and if it's going to help those people, I don't want a part of it. I don't care if it helps me or not. It just can't help those people over there.
You know,
this is awful.
I don't want to agree with you. I really truly don't want to. Okay. I don't want to agree. But I can tell you from the experiences of local friends that were welcomed in one political group while they were riding high. As soon as the other group got into power, they were alienated, isolated, and ostracized by the very people who says you don't share our views, aka our interests, in whatever the agendized item was at the time. So unfortunately, you're spot on, and it's a shame. We should not be, and I know I've heard Rich say this, and I say this, we should not be voting for our interests, voting for our beliefs, but vote as Americans, which is in the best interest of the word overused, misused, and abused by politicians, our constituents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And our for people who are not, I guess it's not a word that I would use for like for us if we're not in public office. But we want to be able to say that we're voting in the best interest of our communities, right? Our schools, our kids, our police stations, our fire stations, the communities that we live, that each of us live in. And so when you hear, like you're saying, those politicians that want to vote in the best interest of their constituents, then what about the rest of us? The constituents also have to vote for the best interest of the constituents. And, you know, Wilkerson says that's not the case. It's not the case. They're voting for their own interests, but only at the expense of other people, which is awful. It feels wrong. And I'm just repeating what's in the book because I agree with the way that she's writing it, the way that she's explaining, like, we need to stop saying that. We need to stop saying that people are voting against their interests. The pundits need to stop saying that because it's not the case. They are actually voting in what they believe in. It doesn't matter what they're saying to the pollsters. It doesn't matter what they're saying. They're saying what people want to hear. And then when they go to actually vote, if they vote, they're voting for, you know, things that they don't want to talk about necessarily. A lot of people, if they're not, you know, riding around saying the South will rise again. This comes out of this sense of perceived injury. After 2008, there was an injury, and they're rising up to find a voice in 2016 by voting Donald Trump in, saying he's going to change things, it's going to get better. But it's so strange, the psychology of what's happened over the last couple of years, the QAnon conspiracy theory, you know, hanging on or looking for these things that will confirm your own bias and somehow make more sense than what's actually happening. I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
One thing that struck me is the discussion of President Obama in this chapter, the discussion of President Obama being the food stamp president.
Mm-hmm.
The realization that had it not been for food stamps, had it not been for the you know, social programs that are helping people move forward with their lives to break through whatever caste system's in place, even though we know how hard that is. But these programs, and then to list it like, well, this president cared about people that were on the other economic scale, you know, in which they needed assistance. And so now he's the food stamp president. And then I thought, how insulting that is for half the country.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and she broke down some of the percentages of, you know, white people voting. I don't know, was it 60 white males voting, what, 63 to 67%? I can't remember the number, for President Trump. But then also broke down, you know, yes, African Americans voted for Hillary, and by wide margins. But there were still, 13, 14% African Americans that voted for Trump. And there was still, 30, 40% Latinx that voted for Trump. And so those struggles of just using the president, insulting the whole thing about the food stamp president, and then sort of taking it, you're voting your interests, but pulling out the things that you hold dear, that self-interest. And then that's why those change in voting. I don't know why people vote the way they do. And when I hear people of color voting Republican, I do admit that my mind goes, what? But the truth is people are voting in their self-interest a lot of the times. And I know that I've talked about that too, where it's like feeling the tax burden is laden on the middle class. It is, but feeling like, come on, give us a break. That's a self-interest kind of thing. I really would like to say, you can continue to tax me at the level that you're taxing me, but God damn it, start taxing these billionaires and making them pay their fair share, and let's balance this thing out a little bit. So I think where I'm even moving further on that political spectrum to the left is when I start to hear the personalized attack on half of our country in a statement like the food stamp president, when half the country qualify for food stamps in some form or qualify for some social assistance, even if that's just getting fee waivers at the local community college or those kinds of things. But it's extremely insulting, and tries to divide us based on some false sense that half the Americans don't need this assistance.
And I'm going to bring it home. First, we had what happened to President Obama. Then recently, within the last month, they did the same thing with General Colin Powell, who was GOP. Why was he villainized by certain segments of society within his own GOP party that made comments about the general and the Secretary of State? What did him and President Obama have in common to cause them both to come under that? Well, I will tell you why some GOP people of color voted the way they vote is because they believed in Lincoln, President Lincoln, and what he did, and President Reagan. But if you notice, in November of 2016, up until November 2020, there wasn't talk about the Republican Party, GOP party of Reagan or Lincoln, but it always was talked about previously McCain, Bush. That's all everybody talked about. That stopped from 2016 to 2020. Why did the GOP change?
Caste. Yeah, it took all that energy, all that destruction to kind of try to get things back to this perceived way that the hierarchy was supposed to look, right? If we act a certain way, if we say certain things, if we ban certain people from coming, if we put brown kids in cages, if we do all of these things, it's going to look like things are back to the way that the hierarchy was set up. And then a lot of things that actually were enacted that now are, still destroying people's lives and helping in some ways, but destroying people's lives. And it's going to take time to get back to that. But I think, Tommy, that you're right, that the backlash with the capital B was the election of Donald Trump as president for having 8 years, that was the backlash. And so we had 4 years of trying to maybe feel like everything needed to stay afloat so that if we could get someone else that, no matter who they were, that if we could get someone else that could get back to actually running the country, that maybe that would that would help. I think even to the extent that if the system goes back to the way it was, maybe we could still manage, but it just can't ever shift back that way. It's like not being, you can't unsee things once you see them. You can't not experience them once you experience them. And the way our friends and family and coworkers and other people in society kind of came out and said that they were injured, really knocked a lot of people off my friends list. I will tell you. I didn't know. I didn't realize that it was like that. Okay, any last words on this topic before we close up?
I had a question that I'm hoping you knew the answer for. When she was talking to that reporter from Washington, D.C., they said 2042. This is about 2042. What did that mean?
The population. It didn't say here. I think it was a reference to minority status. I thought. I might be wrong. And I didn't pull it out, so it's probably not underlined in my book. When she was talking to Gwen Eiffel?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Yes.
I think that's what it is, 2042. I feel like I had heard that. Census projections of an end of the white majority in 2042.
Oh,
it's
okay.
on page 315. So that's in terms of census, the growth of different multicultural groups, that there won't be a majority after 2042.
Okay.
Letty, does it also talk to the key point that I'm familiar with that study? Does it also say in there that just because the current caste dominant group will not be the majority in America, they will remain in power due to voting? Because you take California, where 52% of the population of California is Hispanic, but only 24% of that 52% are registered voter. Therein lies the power.
Right. Yes. So we should also all read Animal Farm and pay attention to Big Brother. Read 1984. Reread Animal Farm. Maybe that'll be the assignment for next time. Let's talk about a dystopia. Who's in power and why are they in power? What's being said? Okay. Thank you both for this conversation. As always, the conversations are not easy. The topics are difficult. Our feelings are hard to get over. But we have to have these conversations in public spaces and, ask questions and make comments and be brave. Next week, December already. December 6th. Where's it at? We're going to cover 3 chapters, 27, 28, and 29. Chapter 28 is only a couple of pages, so still a lot to cover. The price we pay for a caste system, so we'll dive into some more specific examples. With Shannon O'Rourke, Calvin Moore will come back. Shannon, it'll be her first time, and Mike Walsh will also be returning for that. So thank you again. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye, Tommy. Thank you.
Take care. Good to talk to you.